What up, though? Hola, mi gente. It's your host who in the neighborhood and the streets the most, J Hodge with InYourHood.com. And today is another news segment of Hood Sites. Welcome to Hood Sites. And I know I missed yesterday. Had some personal life items that I had to get out the way and get solved and completed. But we back with another segment of Hood Sites. And you already know what we're doing. Plugging you and plugging everybody with information that they do not know. And we disrupting the information that people do not know. And we also are here for those people that don't have the time to source out and seek out information because of their lifestyle, responsibilities, their duties. So they have the time to sit down and source out information. But we also doing it for the people who just choose to not seek out information, who choose to not sit down and know more in order for them to be able to do more. So it's for both. And you already know. Start my morning off 4:30 in the morning, reading every single day, picking one article out of the hundreds, thousands of articles that's out there that can be read, and providing one that I feel like is most beneficial and most critical and crucial to your knowledge base. So before I begin, you already know it's insider time. Insider time. Today's insider is this. Inflation is not going nowhere anytime soon. And when I say inflation, I mean these high prices, these rising prices. And what's happening is the Federal Reserve, they standing their ground. They on their 10 toes. But they on their 10 toes with an eye up. They got like this. They got their eyebrows raised. They standing 10 toes on their position. And they firm on their position, but they got their eye raised too. They still got their eye raised. They still paying attention closely, like I said, to inflation with a magnifying glass. But the fact that they got their eyebrows raised and they peeping what's going on with inflation, they are starting to question whether they should change their monetary policy sooner or later. Apologize for that interruption. Sooner or later. Now, with that being said, that means there's a possibility, a real great possibility, that interest rates can return back to their normal levels or higher levels sooner than what's expected. And that can be 2023, or that can be sometime in mid-2022. We just don't know. But they have been meeting. They've met twice within this last week. And as the numbers continue to come out, the jobless claims numbers continue to drop. As we continue to look at job creation, the number of people employed, the number of people unemployed, the consumer price index, the production price index, as we continue to look at everything that affects a growing or a worsening economy, the feds are about to be in talks about pivoting from their position, from their move. Now, I already said, prices are rising and consumers are starting to now see the effects. Investors are starting now to see the effects. And that's what got people panicking. In the market, and when I say market, I mean stock market. And then also in the world. Prices going up. I need things. I'm going to be able to afford less because prices are going up. The dollar value, the value of the dollar is starting to fall because prices is going up. Companies have to charge more prices to generate revenue, to turn a profit, because prices for them, their inputs, the things that they need to build and make whatever product or provide whatever service is going up. So shortages because of the pandemic other countries are still battling to get back to normal productivity, to full capacity. So resources are limited. It's a lot of moving parts in this, but we cannot neglect it as investors or consumers. And it's causing people to sell in the stock market, sell off at high volumes and high rates because they need capital, they need some gains. But it's also causing consumers to have to invest more or save more, because although you have that extra cash that you can spend from stimulus or whatever pandemic assistance that's being received, the value and the power of that money that you have and access is being affected by these rising prices. So it doesn't matter how much money the government pump out. It don't matter how much money you have, because in the end result, the amount of things that you can buy is lessening every day. So like I said, the Feds is not off their position, but they got their eyebrow out. They looking at inflation, but prices is rising, and you can see it everywhere. And at the same time, investors are pivoting, and as a consumer, you got to pivot. It's either you're going to spend more money and get less, or you're going to save more money and invest it somewhere so you can make a return on the money that you are saving. So you can get back money that you putting into an investment. So it's a lot of moving pieces, but inflation cannot be ignored. That cannot be ignored. It's happening. And I've been saying it for the last 2 weeks to pay attention. But another thing we have to pay attention to is something called the OCC, the Office of the Comptroller of Currency. The OCC is an organization and a committee that actually regulates and controls and brings enforcements to the banks. And seeing as everybody in the black community is in banking and has their money in banks, we have to know and pay attention to the OCC. The OCC is the reason that there's something called the Community Development Act, or the Community Redevelopment Act. They call it the CRA of 1974-1975. We cannot ignore that, because again, it's all about banks being required to improve poor communities where they have set up shop. And they are required to report every year what did they do to make the area better and to make things more equitable and to make things more healthy for the people in that poor community. What's being done, what money is being invested, what events are going on, what knowledge is flowing, what access to capital is being had. But of course, since the Community Redevelopment Act of 1974-1975, there hasn't been no changes. There hasn't been no enforcement. So banks haven't felt obligated to do much for the poor, underrepresented and under-resourced communities. And those are the black communities. So because there hasn't been no real enforcement and no real regulation with the OCC and these annual reports of banks having to report each year what they have done for the community that they are in, given that it's a poor, downtrodden community that needs capital, then there has to be some conviction and there has to be some changes. And in addition to the Federal Reserve, in addition to the CRA, the Community Redevelopment Act, in addition to all those things, the Federal Open Market Committee, and all these things that's going on with the economy, we have the OCC, the Office of the Comptroller of Currency. And so that's what today's news segment is going to be based around. And so we finna get into it. Today's news segment is titled Acting Comptroller of the Currency testifies on the condition of the federal banking system. And before I get started, I want to say they just recently had a meeting, the OCC, and it was on the Federal Reserve's website, because the Federal Reserve is the house of all of this. Everything that has to do with currency and financial resources, it all comes from the Federal Reserve, which is private, not public, by the way. So with that being said, Maxine Waters is a politician, a black woman who deserves her flowers, and she's been holding it down for the black community as far as representing us and being a voice for us. She recently held the OCC's meeting, and she regulated this meeting. And in this meeting, we heard from people from the FDIC, the Federal Depository Insurance. So that's what your money is insured and backed by when you put it in a bank. In case of any economic emergency, you have insurance on your money that's deposited. We also heard from the Comptroller himself, the actual acting chairman of the OCC, the acting chairman and Comptroller of the OCC. And so in this meeting, they discussed what is currently going on in the banking system. They talked a lot of game about how the banking system has been thriving given the pandemic because of all that unemployment assistance money and because of the stimulus payments. But they also addressed other things that they are looking to amend and improve and progress in the banking system. So again, we are going to get started with the news segment. And this is out of their 4 core principles that they have for the banking system. This is the one that I am reading from the actual written statement that was given. So, this is principle number 2 out of the 4. So, this is the congressional testimony by the sitting Comptroller and chairman of the OCC. Number 2, reducing inequality in banking. Continuing. Reducing inequality must be a national priority. The events of the last 2 years have brought our history of financial inequality into sharp relief. Recent research by the Brookings Institute illustrates the stark economic inequality faced by communities of color. Continuing. In the average U.S. metropolitan area, homes and neighborhoods where the share of the population is 50% black are valued at roughly half the price as homes in neighborhoods with no black residents, suggesting that the most important source of generational wealth building has been denied in this segment of the population. Continuing. The pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on minority households and businesses and threatens to further exacerbate financial disparities. The Federal Reserve Survey of Household Economics and Decision Making, known as SHED, S-H-E-D, provides further evidence of the historical disparities experienced by communities and the impact the pandemic has had on the most vulnerable within our nation, the black community. The most recent report from that survey, released in May, showed the gap in financial well-being between white adults and black and Hispanic adults grew by 4 percentage points since 2017 alone, and more than a third of black and Hispanic adults reported doing worse financially than prior to the pandemic. Black and Hispanic households have been more likely to lose income and have trouble making rent or mortgage payments during the pandemic, while minority-owned small businesses have been hit harder than white-owned small businesses. The recovery threatens to leave these and rural communities even further behind. Banks can play an important role in preventing this and closing the wealth gap. Historically, many low-income individuals have been treated by banks as either credits to be avoided or credits to be exploited. The OCC's twin missions of ensuring equal access to financial services and fair treatment speak to both of these challenges. To address this problem, the OCC must work to strengthen regulations implementing the Community Reinvestment Act, CRA, Community Reinvestment Act, or no, Community Redevelopment Act. While the OCC's 2020 final rule took an important step in attempting to improve upon the framework put in place in 1995, I believe there's a significant room for improvement. First, circumstances have changed because of the pandemic, and we should examine the extent to which its aftermath will have a disproportionate impact on minorities, rural communities, and vulnerable groups. Second, the public has provided helpful feedback on the Federal Reserve's advance notice of proposed rulemaking. Third, we have learned important lessons based on the partial implementation of the 2020 rule. I have asked staff to review the 2020 final rule with these considerations in mind. All options are under consideration, including rescinding or substantially revising the current rule and working with the Federal Reserve and FDIC on a joint proposal. Without prejudice to the outcome of the review, I am committed to following normal procedures and seeking public comment on any changes. The CRA, Community Reinvestment Act, is too important to do otherwise. All voices need to be heard and considered. Second, we must be vigilant in examining and enforcing fair lending laws that promise fair treatment and consumer protection and are intended to correct systematic bias of the past. The OCC will not hesitate to use the full range of tools under our supervisory authority to remediate deficiencies when we see them. When warranted, this may include assessing penalties and taking enforcement actions to hold banks accountable for violations of laws and regulations. Third, we must call out racial, gender, and other biases and push for change where needed. For instance, the OCC, Office of the Comptroller Currency, has been monitoring increasing concerns about racial bias in appraisals, particularly in residential lending. The OCC is engaged with stakeholders to raise awareness and facilitate improvements in the appraisal process, making sure banks have the valuation information and data they need to underwrite their loans and manage their risks, and that the process is fair, objective, and free from bias. Finally, in addition to regulatory action and supervision, we have leveraged our status as a respected and knowledgeable federal agency to convene leaders and inspire action toward solving long-standing problems within our financial system. Such is the goal project of REACH, capital REAC, lowercase h. Origin and scope of Project Reach. Last summer, in the midst of the nation's cause for racial and economic equality, the OCC conceived and launched the Roundtable for Economic Access and Change, REACH, known as Project Reach. Project Reach brings together leaders of banking, civil rights, technology, and business organizations to identify and reduce specific barriers that prevent underserved and minority communities from full, equal, and fair participation in the nation's economy. Project Reach convenes those with the ability to help reduce inherent and structural obstacles so underserved populations have the same opportunities to succeed and benefit from the nation's financial system as others. The OCC has dedicated staff supporting the project. Shortly after launch, the participants of Project Reach identified several key barriers to financial inclusion and equity for underserved populations, including lack of usable credit scores, low rates of home ownership, and poor access to capital for minority-owned and small businesses. Continuing. 4 national work streams described below were formed to address those. Inclusion for credit invisibles. 45 million Americans, disproportionately poor and minority, lack a credit score and cannot obtain mortgages, credit cards, or other lending products. Yet many people in this segment pay rent, utilities, and other recurring financial obligations. Project Reach participants are evaluating models that use alternative data sources, including rent payments, utility bill payments, and other direct debit authorizations to demonstrate on-time payment history and boost the credit worthiness of gig economy workers. These can help tear down a major barrier to economic access for millions of consumers and minority entrepreneurs who currently rely on their personal credit to secure business loans. Today, some large banks are in the process of issuing credit cards and other consumer lending products to individuals with no credit score. Other progress in this area was reported in the press last week regarding a collaborative effort to test the use of alternative data and underwriting to provide broader responsible access to credit for previously underserved people. Revitalization of minority depository institutions, MDIs, minority depository institutions. The number of MDIs has declined over the years. The remaining MDIs are critical sources of credit and financial services in their communities, but face challenges with accessing capital, adopting new technology, and modernizing their infrastructures. Project Reach recognizes opportunities for partnerships that deliver sustained financial assistance to help MDIs remain a vibrant part of the economic landscape. The OCC has expanded relationships between larger banks and MDIs, minority depository institutions, through capital investments dedicated to improving the technological infrastructure of MDIs so they can offer the same benefits to their customers like remote capture and faster electronic payment platforms. Last fall, we developed a pledge for larger banks to support MDIs. To date, 22 banks have signed the pledge to provide dedicated technical assistance to help with talent development for MDIs, as well as diversification of product offerings, and have committed nearly $500 million in investments to MDIs. Most recently, we facilitated a meeting between the National Bankers Association, which represents minority financial institutions, and 3 of the largest service providers to mid-sized and community banks to assess how they can build better business relationships with MDIs. and offer more affordable, innovative solutions to them. Increasing home ownership in the inventory of affordable housing. Home ownership is one of the primary ways that families build wealth. Notably, since the Great Recession, the home ownership gap between blacks and whites has grown to its highest level in 50 years. One of the biggest barriers to home ownership for minority borrowers is that they do not have enough saved for a down payment. Working with civil rights and community-based groups, several participating banks have developed or expanded down payment assistance programs for minority and underserved home buyers. These programs work in conjunction with community groups with counselors approved by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to provide consumers educational support for eligibility in these programs. To increase the inventory of affordable housing, particularly in densely populated markets, Project REACH participants are exploring converting bank-owned housing inventories into affordable homes through low-cost transfer and renovation loans. This has included proposals to repurpose underutilized and surplus commercial real estate into mixed-use facilities that will include residential property and provide additional home buying opportunities. Expanding access to capital for minority-owned and small businesses. Project REACH participants are also engaged in evaluating models and strategies to facilitate the loan participations in consortium lending to minority-owned and small businesses. The effort involves developing a consortium model whereby MDIs, Community Development Financial Institutions, CDFIs, and larger banks collaborate to support agricultural businesses and emerging commercial enterprises and industries in rural and native communities such as clean energy and broadband. To support small businesses more generally, other Project REACH participants are identifying the challenges of collateral requirements and transitioning entrepreneurs from overutilization of consumer credit towards establishing a commercial credit profile and small business identity that meets these qualifications for small business trade lines. Participants also are currently developing a comprehensive guide for entrepreneurs to point them to the resources they need along the business development continuum. Finally, a participating Project REACH banks have created and offer virtual procurement showcases for minority-owned enterprises and entrepreneurs from underserved communities to build better relationships and provide opportunities for growth and expansion. While the 4 work streams noted above are national in scope, the path to economic inclusion is often local. Needs differ across communities and markets. That is why we have created area-specific demonstrations of Project REACH, where local stakeholders directly voice what their needs are and how to overcome their specific and unique economic barriers. Regional programs and efforts have expanded to Los Angeles, and several other cities are under consideration as areas of focus. OCC's commitment to diversity and inclusion. As an agency, we also need to do our part to reduce inequality and improve our own diversity, equity, and inclusion. As acting comptroller, I am committed to continuing to promote these efforts and ensure that they continue to be areas of focus for my executive committee. The OCC engages in comprehensive hiring, recruitment, and employee retention strategies to support efforts to expand agency diversity. We also provide a wide range of formal and informal career development opportunities to provide leadership skills to our employees, which are crucial for career development. Additionally, the OCC has 8 employee network groups, each of management around diversity and inclusion programs within the OCC. These have proven to be a valuable means to attract and retain employees from diverse backgrounds and create an inclusive work environment for all employees. Such efforts have made some progress. Over the past 10 years, the OCC's total minority workforce has increased, and both manager and senior level manager positions held by minority and female populations also have increased. While the trend is positive and strides have been made, more needs to be done. For the 3rd consecutive year, the OCC will host its High School Scholars Internship Program, HSSIP, this summer, a 6-week paid internship for nearly 100 minority students from public and charter high schools in the District of Columbia. This program provides an opportunity for students to explore a variety of career paths at the OCC, gain an understanding of the financial services industry, and engage in enrichment activities on financial literacy and leadership fundamentals. In addition to our HSSIP program, the OCC has provided minority college students paid internship opportunities for more than a decade through its National Diversity Internship Program. End of article. So again, today's title of today's news segment was called "The Acting Comptroller of the Currency Testifies on the Condition of the Federal Banking System." And the actual statement was the written testimony to the congressional body. And now, Michael J. Sue, HSU, is the acting comptroller of the currency. So he is the acting comptroller of the OCC, the chairman. And the OCC, it's important for us to know who the OCC is and what the CRA is, because the OCC is the overseer of banking and financial institutions, all of which are in our community. So you're talking Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, the banks that you see the most. Now, with that being said, banks are responsible and are obligated and are required to provide equitable resources to impoverished and poor communities of poverty, where predominantly that is black communities. So this was a lot of words and a lot of great intentions. It was a lot of great initiatives. There was great ideas and ideals. And it all sounded good. It sounded so phenomenal. But again, this is just like civil rights. There's a lot of discussion and talk. And there's a lot of written motives, but there's not a lot of actual realized actions. So we will have to see the numbers. We as a black community have to pay attention to the numbers. The numbers is the impact. How much of all of this initiative and programming and discussion and identified our opportunities, how much of all this identifying in known behavior, known racist and discriminative and prejudiced behavior is going to actually be realized and amended and rectified? When will it truly be done? Civil rights, we took a lot foolishly and delusionally our community thought that the government and thought that these white politicians and organizations were truly of and about their words. But as you can see, we got ran into a burning house. Integration didn't mean elevation or vertical structures. Integration meaning, hey, we will let them in, but we're not going to let them go up. They're not going to advance. And so this is that again. We have the OCC acting under the strict guide of the CRA, which hasn't been changed in decades, which has caused banks to be lenient and lackadaisical and content with giving the bare minimum on purpose, intentionally. And now they want to get and provide a statement stating things as if it's a shock. There's inequalities, as if there's a shock. There's disparity, as if there's a shock. Like, it's surprising, like they didn't know. We cannot be deceived or delusioned again. This is another era. This is another era of civil rights for us. Except this ain't about civil rights. This is about human rights. And this is truly about cultural progression, not cultural integration or assimilation. Progression, meaning we're going vertical in our decision making. Our decision making is taking us up. It's not taking us in. Integration is a horizontal structure. And that has gotten us nowhere. Wealth-wise, financially, economically, as a cultural group, it has gotten us nowhere. So, a lot of things to pay attention to, and a lot of marvelous and phenomenal and righteous words were said, but righteous actions have been lackluster and have been neglected and have been very negligible each time and every time we have seen institutions position themselves to front face the public and the nation and say, hey, we are not racist and we are not prejudiced and we are righteous because we have these written initiatives and these written plans to do these things for one group of people. The most attacked and the most weaponized cultural group. Now, the OCC, we will have to wait and see what truly does happen and what truly does open up as far as access. Because this is a soft proposal, meaning this is not being enacted everywhere just yet. They're testing it out. They're going to test it in Cali. They're going to test it in DC. But it's not being implemented and enforced everywhere. So with that being said, this cannot be ignored and it cannot be neglected because the OCC has to be held accountable and convicted for anything it doesn't follow through on in this written proposal and to this written statement to the congressional body. It all sounds good and we heard it all before, but real actions have to be taken and we don't have to sit back and wait on things to be done. We as a cultural group have to realize our own challenges, constraints, our own cultural challenges, constraints, and issues, and create our own cultural solutions in the midst of white institutions and white structures wanting to play catch up. So we have to get ahead with our demands and our supply and let them catch up to our demand and our supply. But for the most part, this is what cultural power does. We pressure the issue. The pressure is on. So from the time they've written this statement, from the time the OCC have written this statement for all banking institutions, for all large commercial banks to be obligated for MDIs, the minority depository institutions, so that's your One United banks, to be for one United, that's one of them, and others. Everybody has to be held to the most strict conviction and accountability if this written statement is the words that they say they gonna stand on. But often, too many times, repetitively, cyclically, because it's been a cycle. This is very cyclical. But cyclically, we've seen them not stand on all these written words and all these written missions that they have. It's just front facing. All it does is it's an attempt to soften the atrocities and to soften the suffering. To say, hey, we see you. We see it. We see what's going on. And we say we're going to do something about it. So you can get complacent and get content as a black man, woman. But we're not going to really do anything. Fooled you once again. We can't continue that cycle. So again, this is that recipe that I always cook up and that I always say in every news segment. This is cultural power. And what is in the ingredients of cultural power? How do you make that? Cultural identity, being prideful and being empowered in who you are, which leads you to your cultural moral values and principles. And then you're able to identify your cultural challenges, constraints, and issues, which leads you to your cultural creative solutions, which leads you to cultural sustainability, progress, and advancement for generations to carry on, which leads to a cultural legacy. And it just continues, that cycle just continues. The wheel keeps spinning, it will never stop. What's in motion will always stay in motion. That's what cultural power is. All those ingredients. And this is that. Keep the pressure on, and let's keep putting the pressure on. Because now the OCC is not, they're not redeemed of anything. The OCC and these commercial banking institutions, these major banking facilities, they are not relieved from any convictions or accountability because they gave out a written statement. No, the pressure is on now. Now they're under pressure. Let's see what results are truly realized. Let's see what capital gains we receive. Because they've been unrealized in the past. But now the pressure is on. But like I always say, www.inyourhood.com. Sign up for a free account within seconds. Keep up with the latest, greatest features, news, and updates and features. At the In Your Hood Instagram is at His Excellency _J, the letter J, .Hodge. And then we have the In Your Hood YouTube is the letter J, space Hodge, H-A-J-J, J Hodge. And you can subscribe. And we have content and new content and material over on our YouTube channel that's being released also. So subscribe. And then also, if you're watching this, Facebook, you got the ability just to like the page and automatically follow in your hood, in yourhood.com. And like I said, we have everything. We have our digital television show, Where's J. Hodge's Journey in These Streets? It's 24/7 streaming. We have lectures, 24/7 live streaming on the website. We have True Essence of Black History, the real Black history in its fullest extent. So people you may know and people you might know. And then we have global Black news and domestic Black news. That's what's happened throughout history. Our figures, our geniuses, our scientists, just people who have advanced our lives as it is today and have taken up certain actions and missions and seen it through. And there's a bunch of stories that we don't know that haven't been told and that are very much so available. And I have it there on inyourhood.com. Then we have Black businesses. Black businesses that you may not have heard of or done business with or got familiar with. And if those businesses are in your area, there you go. You can get connected. And we forever looking for more Black businesses of all industry types, all sorts. And like I always say, I'm going to get on y'all tomorrow.